Hi guys, thank you for watching this. Most of the time I'm working on old cars, like older cars. Today we're gonna work on a 2005 Toyota Camry. This is my daughter's car, well, and so is that one. So she just got the Beetle running, and that's what she's gonna drive to high school. And then can get my hands on this thing. We gotta change shock absorbers in it, so I'm probably gonna deal with the brakes a little bit. So let's go start it up and make some space for it in the garage. Toyota Camry is a very boringly reliable vehicle. As you see, I got a few older cars. So first we're gonna move this Mercury out and then put the Camry in here. In the 1970s, this was the Toyota Camry. This was the standard of the car world, and it was a very reliable means of transportation with the 8-track tape player and other things, but that time has passed. Let's see if the old girl will start. Oh, perfect. Yeah, this one is more comfortable than that Camry, that's for sure, at least to me. We're gonna start with the front wheels, and in order to get the front wheels off, we're gonna jack up the car, put some jack stands under it, remove the hubcaps, and remove the front wheels so we can get to the shock absorbers. And we're gonna need to open up the hood because the screws for the shock absorbers will be under the hood. So the car is up on the jack stands, and here's the part that we're gonna change. This is a cheater kit because normally at reputable shops you keep the spring, and what you do is to take this out, take this bolt out once the whole thing is compressed, so you can compress this spring, and then you're only changing the shock absorber. But I figure it's so cheap that just to buy the whole thing, it's so easy to do, I'm just gonna go with the cheater kit. I call it the cheater kit because it's so easy that it's almost feel like it's cheating. So we got 3 nuts on the top and 2 on the bottoms and 1 brake line. So if you see it here, we gotta take apart this, and there is a stabilizer bolt which goes on the other side right there. And once those are done, the only thing we need to do is to take these 3 nuts off, and the whole thing comes out. New one can go in. Super easy, isn't it? I always start with the hardest or most questionable part, and that would be this one, because that looks like it's really grown together. So I'm gonna have to clean this up first, and then I'm gonna take this one off. The ABS signal wire is already popped off, so then we're just gonna do the big bolts at the end. Starting with the turn stabilizer, I cleaned off the inside of the bolt, and I was able to put an Allen key on it, and while holding it I can open it up. I also put a bunch of rust treatment on it, so I got PB blaster and then blasted it with it, so I should be able to get it off now. I got this nut off and I put it back on it, make sure it doesn't get lost. Also I got this bolt out, so when you take this out the whole thing falls apart, and you can put it on the side. And now the only thing what's missing right now to take off these 2 big ones. The 2 big ones will take some serious amount of force, but we'll get it out is actually through bolts, so to take the nut off and then take the whole thing out. And once it came out, this whole part, this whole wheel assembly will fold out after you put a screwdriver in here somewhere and then you push it out. It was pretty easy. So now I got it off, the whole thing moves, so you can just move the whole thing. So I'm just gonna have to take those 3 screws off, 3 nuts off at the top, and it should be good to go. I put a jack underneath to make sure it doesn't rest on its own weight, so it will be easier to put it back together too with a jack underneath. All right, now we just got a big hole here. So the occupant of this hole is over here. So if you can see, they look very similar. It's just the only thing what's yeah, no, that's pretty much the way it goes back in. It's perfect. So Yep, let's just hang it back up, put the nuts on, and then we can reinstall the rest of the stuff. The orientation is important. Looks like this one is a little bit bent, so as this one. So we want to make sure that those bolts are lining up properly, and we'll have the same amount of bend in it. Put the original nuts on, I like them better. And then down here I had to release the jack a little bit, so make sure the whole thing goes lower. And then when it went lower, I was able to lift it up just enough to where the hole is lined up, and I was able to push the two large bolts on. So now I'm going to put the washers on and tighten it up. I'm not going to be able to align it too good. Basically you align the angle here, so we'll take it to alignment anyway. They'll do it there. This one is tight, this one is tight, this one is tight, this one is tight. This is clipped back into where it lives, and we are done. Was it hard? I think it was pretty dang easy. So if you want to do it at home, as long as you have a jack stand, 22 millimeter wrench. I think if you got these 22 millimeter wrenches, even with two of them, you can undo these. And you need an Allen key. I don't know what size Allen key was, but yeah, it looks like it's a 6 millimeter Allen key what goes into the middle, and pretty much that's it. You can do it at home, in front of the house, anywhere. It's not rocket science. I've finished the passenger side as well, but I have a little problem with the brakes. So the brakes were not doing all that well. So when I was looking at it, it looks like here's the brake pad, which is fine. Here's the caliper. Caliper has a big piston in the middle, and it's like a floating caliper, so it's supposed to float on these two bolts what's inside here, and they are completely frozen. I was trying to move one and it just perfectly totally broke off. So I need to buy one of these caliper brackets. O'Reilly's actually sells it. So tomorrow I'm gonna pick it up. I'm gonna change the brake pads because they were unevenly worn. So this one was wore out more than the other side, because the piston was actually moving really nicely, but the whole caliper was not moving. So piston was moving just on that side, and then the whole caliper didn't move, so therefore it couldn't actually put pressure on the outer one. Last night I ordered some caliper brackets from O'Reilly's, so they should be here by noon. And then while we're waiting for it, we're gonna take apart this side as well to make sure that we can just snap on the new ones. And then once we got the brake disassembled, we're gonna head to the back and start working on the rear shock absorbers as well. In order to get to the thing we're doing, we're gonna have to turn the steering wheel. If you have a car with a power steering and it's lifted up and the engine is not running, you gotta turn the steering wheel ever slowly, so the oil has time to readjust. Otherwise the reservoir will overfill and it just basically leaks out in the reservoir if you do it too fast. So we want to make sure that a caliper will come out, and then we can get to it easier. So before we start doing it, I just want to say that both sides will be changed, because if I don't change this one, it will go bad very soon after, probably. But even if it works, the friction going to be different between this side and the other side. So I just want to make sure both of them are new. It doesn't cost too much money anyway, so I'm just going to change both sides. Before I start doing this, I just have a strong wire, which I have for this reason. So once we take that one caliper off, I'm going to be able to push it through that hole over here and then hang it up so it wouldn't hang on the brake line. So first we're going to take off this little bolt and this little bolt. They are the one holding on this whole caliper, but actually technically before we do that, we want to make that piston go back a little bit. So we're going to put a screwdriver in here and then push the whole thing this way, so the piston will move back a little bit, so it would be easier to get it off. So we got a screwdriver, we find where the middle of it is and start pushing on it, and slowly until it pushes the piston back in a little bit, enough to, so you're gonna move a little bit and we're gonna be able to just pull it off easy. Now we're gonna loosen this big bolt here, and this one is at 14 millimeter bolt. We do not loosen up the big one yet because there's a lot of forces what we need to apply on that, so we just want to clear this first. So we're going to take this bolt out from here. Now it's coming by hand, and then we're going to do the bottom one as well, and then we can hang this thing up. once we got both of these bolts out, now since we push the piston back, it's really easy to just get it off. You can see the very large caliper piston, and we do not want to let it hang on this rubber hose, the brake hose. So we're gonna put that wire through one of these holes, and we're gonna hang it up. Now that it's nicely hanging, now we can check if these ones working. Well, this one was working, the bottom one not so much. So we can take the brake pads off, and then we can get to these two large bolts over here. This one and that one. So next thing we're gonna do is get to take those big bolts out. So now you can see I got the two big bolts out of it with a 17 millimeter, and I use this large wrench with a 6-angle socket on the end, and now the whole thing is just coming off. So you can see how much it was used on the inside where the big piston is, and not much was used on the outside because these two pins are frozen in it. So you can see that this outer pad was not used too much. On the other hand, the inner was actually almost wore out. So that clearly says that one or both of these pins were not sliding. So the question is, when you go to the store, when they're asking you what kind of brake pads you want, the question what they're asking is, do you want to change the rotor or do you want to change the pads? There's no such a thing as you don't have to change neither. So if you buy a softer, cheaper brake pad, that means that you're don't have to probably change the rotor. But if you buy some ceramic last forever brake pad, then that means that you're gonna probably have to either tear down the rotor or turn it, or actually have to change it. But for some cars, these rotors are super inexpensive, so who cares? But for some other cars, or maybe classic cars, they are unobtainable, and then you gotta be careful with it. Unfortunately, the backside of this rotor looks really bad, so I think I'm gonna either buy a new rotor. It shouldn't cost too much, or just have it turned. But I think I'm just gonna see if the car parts store has a new one for me. But while we wait, I'm gonna go to the back and start working with a rear shock absorber and lift the car up, take the wheel off, and get to it. I got the rear wheel off, and I also got the drum off. And I just wanted to look at what it looks like in here, but it looks everything is just fine. So I'm just gonna put this drum back and concentrate on changing the shock absorber. Well, it's pretty much the same game as in the front. So we're gonna first take the stabilizer arm nut off, and then the this bolt was holding all the brake lines and other stuff, ABS sending cable, and then we're gonna take these really big bolts out at the bottom as well. We're gonna put a jack underneath to make sure the whole thing wouldn't fall down. And once this whole strut is free, we're gonna find where the bolts are in the inside of the car. Of course, you couldn't do it with the same bolts, so the main bolts had to be 17 millimeter. The little one is holding this ABS cable is 10 millimeter, and then this one was 12 holding the brake line on. This thing came off. That was 14 millimeter, and now the whole thing is out and moving. So now I just need to find the bolts what holding this on. This is how the rear shock absorber looks like. We're gonna have to find these 3 nuts, and those 3 nuts actually living in a little cubby hole behind this piece here. So in order to get to it, we need to remove this. The problem is this one has a bolt way down there what's holding it on. In order to get to it, we need to remove the bottom cushion. So the only thing you need to do is find where, with your hand, where it's got a little metal piece, and pull it up, and it's gonna unclip from there. Super easy. And then you just basically need to pull it up. One here, one on the other side. Here's my light to illuminate it, and then you can see there is the bolt right there. That bolt is the one what we need to remove. So now that I moved the seat just a little bit away, we can get to it. I don't want to move it all the way out, because then I have to reinstall these seat belt clips. This is a place this is a way you can see it better. So here's the one bolt. What's holding it is a 12 millimeter, by the way. And then once you get that bolt out, this whole thing, it was just hooked in with this hook. So you just basically have to push the whole thing up, and then once you push it up, the whole thing unhooks, comes out. And now we can get to the little bolts where they're living inside that whole flashlight here, so you can see there. living right there. So that's what that's the 3 bolts what we need to undo, and then we can reinstall the new one. All right, it's out. So obviously this is the old one, and this is what I had out. And before I put it in, I'm really glad that I actually compared the two, because the right side and left side is not the same. So you can see this little ear is at the wrong place on this one. Correction, it's on the right place, but this one for the other side. As you can see, the little ear is on the same side as the one I pulled off. So this is what is going to go into the driver's side. This is going to be the passenger side. So now I'm just going to hang it back in there and put the nuts on and go from there. So it turns out I couldn't reach the back side, the back nut. So this is the best wrench for the back nut to put on. And then you can just tighten it or untighten it. It actually came by hand. Just as soon as you loosened it, as soon as I loosened it, it just came right off by hand. So this is the best wrench to use that for. Everything is done here, so now I'm just gonna reinstall this thing the way it came out. And then now we're gonna, once that's in, we're gonna head on down here, and then we're gonna reinstall all the bolts and screws what we took off earlier. It went in. It wasn't easy because I haven't done it before. So what you gotta be careful with, to make sure that on this side it nicely lines up with this. This actually goes in between, and then when you come on this side, you're able to actually see through here and see where this little hook will hook into the body part, and then the whole thing just very gently slides down and everything lines up. On the bottom you can see the place for the bolt is all nicely lined up. So that's really easy actually if you know what you're doing. Everything is done on this side, so now we can put the wheel back on. So once more, we got these 2 big bolts installed. We got the little one with a 12mm head, and then the other one is even smaller with a 10mm head. We had this one, the stabilizer arm, and was also installed. So now it's all good. It's gonna have to be adjusted when you take it for an alignment. They're gonna have to open up these big bolts, and they're gonna have to adjust the angle at the alignment place. So it's all good. So you can put the wheel back, and I'm gonna do this exact same thing on the other side. Only difference is that now this lower cushion is loose, so it's gonna be easier to get to the other side of that big the small little side cushion. So that's the only thing what I need to do, and then do all these other things. So I'm not gonna bore you with that repetition. But meanwhile, I got the front discs back, and I have the new brake parts for the front, so I can put the brake back together once I'm done with the other side. The rear of the car is done. I got the 2 shock absorber units changed. Now I'm gonna put the bolt back in where we let the oil down. I'm gonna take the oil filter off. Here's the oil filter and the new one. I put some oil in it, and I'm gonna put a little bit oil on this seal to make sure we're gonna be able to take it off when next time we're gonna try to change it. By the way, this is my favorite type of plier to take an oil filter off. It works really well. When you're putting the oil filter up, you gotta be careful to make sure the surface is clean where you're gonna put it up on the engine side, and then do not touch any kind of part of the dirty car and underneath when you're putting this oil filter up, because dirt is not gonna help your engine internal parts. When you put this oil filter up, do not use the plier. Just do it by hand, tighten it real well, and then just a little bit back, and that's it. Do not over tighten it, because you're not gonna be able to take it off with anything. It can be a major repair if you really over tighten that oil filter. If you don't tighten it enough, then it's gonna get loose, and then you're gonna lose oil pressure. So you gotta find the right balance to tighten it just so. When you're pouring the oil in, is this oil can made that way, so if you pour it like this, it's gonna make all kind of glue sounds, so it will actually be gonna spray everywhere. So they made these cans, so if you hold it like this, actually to have it up, this part would be up, then you can actually very nicely put it there, and then very nicely can pour it in very easily without spilling it everywhere. This is how this can was made. Once we started the car and it's on a level surface, right now it's not on a level surface because the front is raised. So once it's down on its wheels, then I can check the oil level with this. But before we start the car is useless. So what you really need to do is to start the car once you have oil in it and the oil filter is up. And then once you started the car, let it idle, turn it off, let it sit just a little bit, and then you gotta check the oil level in the engine and then fill it accordingly. It's really hard to take oil out, so I would be careful how much I put in. It looks like the valve cover gasket, it leaks a little bit, so I think I'm just gonna have to get a valve cover gasket and change it next time. I usually buy my oil at O'Reilly's, and then I put that in that bucket, and that bucket is gonna be returned to O'Reilly's, and then they have a proper way to recycle the oil. I would never ever put that oil out on my field. I've seen other people do that, but that's absolutely crazy. So I'm gonna collect the old oil in that bucket and then take it back to O'Reilly's, and they recycle it properly. All right, let's finish off that brake. So the problem is that in this bezel, what I had on it, this pin was totally stuck in it. So this whole thing, the whole caliper was unable to float on it, because we got these two pins in it, and it's supposed to float on that pin. Unfortunately, fortunately, O'Reilly's sells these remanufactured bezels, and also they sell the pin. There's the pin number, and here's the rubber seal number. Here are the rubber seals on the side, and they actually have a little holder, and that will go on here, and we're gonna have to hit it in it with a tool. And then we got this little piece which also goes on it. So this whole thing will actually go in here, and it will be protected. So we're gonna grease these pieces up, and then we're gonna put it into position. For the grease, I usually use the caliper grease. This one is from my Mercedes-Benz's. I got a 107 from 1981. His name is Hans. And I also got a 240D, which is in Atlanta right now, because that's where I'm based right now at work. So both of them use this grease in the same similar components. They have a different kind of caliper, but I use this for the same purpose, really. So using this grease, I'm gonna grease this up, and then we'll install these ones, and the whole thing will go back together, and then we can install it on the car. First, I put a bunch of grease inside. Now we're gonna make it go, push it all the way in with it, and then now it's all in. You're gonna put a bunch of this grease on this side too. You can see there's little flat bars on it, flat pieces on it, and that's there to actually hold the grease in position. So we're gonna grease it all up, and then I got one of these sockets, and with this socket I can just basically push this on into position. And then once it's all on it, then we can push this pin in, and it's going to be ready for installation. What I totally forgot to mention, that these two holes are not the same. As you see, one of them has a letter A on it. On the letter A, the pin which has no rubber on it, that's where it goes in. The pin with no rubber, we're barely going to go in, the other one is going to get stuck, and it's just not going to do anything. So the larger pin with no rubber on it will go into where the letter A is, and the other one, which has a little groove on it, and this little groove will have this rubber on, this will go into the other one which has no letter A on it, but we're going to have to grease it up. So this way both of them will work fine. So now I'm going to grease them up and also install the new boots, and they can actually go on the car now. These parts have the same part number for the left side and for the right side, so it doesn't matter which one you put where. So this hole has no thread in it, but this part does have a thread in it. So this will go in like this. But at first we need to put on the nicely redone, resurfaced brake rotors. Before I do that, I'm gonna clean off the surface here to make sure that they have a good surface to lay on. If you have decided to replace the rotors with a new one, the new one most likely will come greased up or oiled up to make sure the surfaces will not rust while it's on the shelf. So first you're going to need to degrease it before you install the new rotors. These ones were just been turned down, so they're not going to be greasy at all. So I just not going to do that, but I have it on. So this thing goes on. I would recommend not to use impact wrench with this bolt. I broke one, a really strong one, on my Mercedes once, and it gave me all kind of hell to get it out, and it's just not worth it. So I just use a regular socket, and then we'll tighten this up nicely once they're on. It's going to require a lot of force. This needs a lot of force to tighten this up with. I use this big bar to tighten up those bolts. You can use an actual. I use this big bar to tighten up these bolts. You can actually use a torque wrench and look at the specifications if you want, but I just use this one. So now we can put on the brake pads. The brake pads usually have this little part here to make sure they don't make a big squelching sound, and they have this little pad on the back which prevent it from squelching. So actually simply just gonna put it there and push it onto its position, and then we can put the big caliper on. So once I have both of them on, see this a little bit sideways, gotta make sure that they go on nicely, and then we can put the caliper on. This one went on good, the other one didn't. I'm gonna have to play with it until it's actually takes it. There it is. So now you can see both of them really nicely there. So now you can get the caliper off the hook and then place it over it and put the 2 bolts in. Now these 2 bolts, I always put a little thread lock on them. They look like this. I like to use the original one and put a little thread lock on it before I put them into position. The reason it's not going on because that piston is a little bit out, so we got to push that piston back even further. It went on very nicely, so I put just a little bit of blue thread lock on it. We're going to find the hole and then screw it in, and we're going to tighten up this one and tighten up the bottom one, and then we are done with this side. You could use a 17mm wrench to hold it and then tighten it, but this was tightened up so nicely I don't think I really need to do it more. I think if I would tighten it more, it would probably just break it, so it's good where it is. So we're done with this side. Now I'm gonna make sure this hook is off, what I put on for holding this cylinder, and then once we remove that, we are done with this side. So I'm just gonna put the wheels back on and then get on with the other side. So I'm not gonna bore you with that. It's just the same thing as you see on this side. Now that it's all down, we're gonna sit in the car, start it to run the oil around, and then we're gonna press on the brake just a little bit. You gotta be very careful when you worked on the car with the brakes that the cylinders are all the way back in. So you need to work those cylinders out until they're actually gonna become effective. So now I'm not gonna push all the way down to the floor because the pedal will go all the way down to the floor, but you can break parts if you do that. What I'm gonna do once the engine started is that look for oil pressure. Once we have oil pressure, then I'm gonna step on the brake a couple of times, not too far, and I rather pump it until I feel that there's actually something there. Once something there, then I really step on it, and then it should be good to go. Now we got oil pressure. It was on the left side, and then now I stepped on the brake a couple of times. Now we got brake 2, so we're gonna turn it off and check how much oil we have in it. Now we're gonna pull this thing out. We're gonna clean it. I wouldn't have dropped it. And once we cleaned it real good, then we're gonna put it back in. And we're gonna count to 1, 2, 3, pull it out, and then we're gonna check it, but it's barely at the minimum, so that really tells me that I really need to put some more oil in it. Now we can see it was perfectly full. So I guess it's good to go. Now the last thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go around the wheels and I'm gonna retorque the nuts with this large wrench to make sure that they all actually tighten. And then I'm gonna put the hubcaps back on because we're gonna take it to the alignment store and they're gonna have to take them off anyway. So with this, we are finished. Thank you for watching. I hope you was able to use the information I provided you, but it's really not a guidance how to fix your car. I was just showing you what I'm doing with mine. So I just recommend you taking your car to a professional and let them do it. Thanks for watching again, and bye.